Hi, it's Katrina! From switching custody every 6 months to having a line drawn right through your town, here are 8 of the world's most bizarre international borders. Number 8. The Northwest Angle. The northernmost part of the contiguous United States is a 123 square mile piece of land that's located at the northwestern corner of Minnesota's Lake of the Woods. It's known as the Northwest Angle and can only be accessed by boat or by first crossing through Canada. Much of it is owned by the Red Lake Nation of the Chippewa Tribe. This bizarre arrangement is mainly the result of the 1783 Treaty of Paris. In recognizing American independence, Great Britain agreed upon a U.S.-Canada boundary from the Atlantic Ocean to the Mississippi River that was complicated due to the errors of a map maker named John Mitchell, who mistakenly portrayed Lake of the Woods as intersecting with the Mississippi River. Whoops! As you've guessed by now, British explorer David Thompson proved in 1798 that the Mississippi River's northernmost point did not intersect with Lake of the Woods. American and British diplomats attempted to renegotiate the boundary in 1807 by suggesting the 49th parallel as the established defining point of the northern boundary westward of the Mississippi. However, the Americans refused to alter anything that would change the treaty under which they gained their independence, so everything got kind of confusing. In the 1870s, the borderline concerning the Northwest Angle was resurveyed, and both Great Britain and Canada offered to purchase the territory from the U.S. Despite the small piece of land holding little value, the Americans steadfastly refused to sell. During the 1990s, threats of secession were made due to fishing regulations, but an agreement was eventually worked out. Earlier this year, a petition was started by an anonymous proponent of the Northwest Angle being handed over to Canada. Residents of the Northwest Angle, known as Anglites, have taken the proposed redefining of boundaries with a grain of salt. While they're grateful for their American roots, the Anglites are on nothing but friendly terms with their Canadian neighbors. When passing from Canada into the Northwest Angle or vice versa, you have to make a video phone call to the appropriate country's customs agents via a telephone at a Northwest Angle convenience store called Jim's Corner. Have any of you been there? Let me know in the comments below. Number 7. The Diomede Islands. The Diomede Islands are a pair of rocky islands situated in the middle of the Bering Strait between Alaska and Siberia. The Big Diomede Island belongs to Russia, while the smaller one belongs to the United States. Despite being only 2.5 miles apart from one another, the islands straddle the international date line, which marks the border between Russia and the United States. The islands therefore lie within 2 time zones with a vast time difference. As a result of this boundary, Big Diomede is 23 hours ahead of Little Diomede. Due to this difference, the big one has earned the nickname the Tomorrow Island, while Little Diomede is known as the Yesterday Isle. Catchy, right? Yupik Inuit originally inhabited the islands around 3,000 years ago. Russian explorer Semyon Desnayov was the first European explorer to reach the islands in 1648. The islands were rediscovered 80 years later by Danish navigator Vitus Bering. In 1867, the U.S. purchased Alaska from Russia, including Little Diomede. Thereafter, Big Diomede became a Russian military base, while Little Diomede was developed into a small community of around 75 people, which contained a school and a church. During World War II, the inhabitants of Big Diomede were driven from the island. Meanwhile, Little Diomede residents who strayed too close to the border were taken prisoner by the Russians. Today, both islands are home to separate indigenous populations, each numbering in the hundreds. Despite being so close, they have different national affiliations and time zones. Number 6. Bärle-Hertog, Bärle-Nassau. One of the world's most elaborate international borders is that which zigzags along the Belgian town of Bärle-Hertog and the Dutch town of Bärle-Nassau. The two countries agreed to install a series of white crosses throughout town, marked with either a B or an NL to identify what country a given area belonged to. This delineation of boundaries is so precise, the line runs through homes, storefronts, lawns, shops, and even a cafe. At one point, restaurants that were split by the boundary simply shifted table service from the Dutch side to the Belgian side when Dutch law required the establishments to close early. When it comes to voting in elections, a citizen's jurisdiction is determined by the location of their front door. This confusion dates back to the Middle Ages, when the land was split up between the Duke of Brabant, who took ownership of Bärle-Hertog, while the medieval House of Nassau claimed Bärle-Nassau. In 1831, Belgium declared its independence from the Netherlands, and the confusing boundary went without official determination until 1995. To this day, the properties look mostly the same, resembling a typical red brick Dutch town, and around 3/4 of the region's 9,000 residents are Dutch passport holders. Aside from being differentiated by the crosses that dot the town, there are some other differences between the Dutch and Belgian properties, including the more architecturally diverse aspects of the Belgian plots. Many of today's residents have dual citizenship, and their peaceful coexistence serves as an example of how two different communities can live harmoniously alongside one another. The area is also a hotbed for tourism, and the boundary is beneficial for the local economy, even though the dichotomy continues to present hurdles when it comes to things like building permits. Day-to-day life can be a tad complicated. What do you think about this boundary? Does it make sense to have a line like this drawn through the middle of a town? Let me know in the comments below, and be sure to subscribe if you haven't already. We'd love to have you! Number 5. Wagah-Attari Border Ceremony. At first glance, there's nothing unique about the Wagah border between Pakistan and India. Since 1959, however, this border has been the site of a daily flag-lowering ritual carried out jointly by the Border Security Force of India and the Pakistan Rangers. Every evening, 2 hours before sunset, the respective agencies engage in a simultaneous dance-like drill. The ceremony serves as a paradoxical representation of the country's rivalries, as well as brotherhood and cooperation. The nightly ceremony occurs at the Wagah border, which is part of the Grand Trunk Road. Until the 1999 opening of the Amaze Setu in Kashmir, it was the only road link between the countries of India and Pakistan. A blustering parade from both sides marks the beginning of the ceremony, which is ended by a perfectly coordinated lowering of the two nations' flags. This daily regal event draws many tourists and has now become a time-honored tradition. Number 4. Khunjerab Pass. At an elevation of 15,397 feet, the Khunjerab Pass, which marks the Pakistani and Chinese border, is the world's highest paved international crossing. It's also the highest point along the 807.8-mile-long Karakoram Highway, which spans from the Punjab province of Pakistan into China, eventually becoming China National Highway 314, and it's one of the most dangerous roads in the world. Along with being located at a high altitude, the roadway, which was completed in 1982, presents the hazard of rough terrain. On the Pakistani side, the road is gravel, and on the Chinese side, it's made of bad asphalt, in quotation marks. The pass is closed to all vehicles except large trucks between December and April due to the possibility of mudslides. During the winter season, the pass is often covered in snow, and is therefore generally closed to all vehicles from November 30th to May 1st. Things like potholes, flash floods, intermittent road construction, and police checkpoints may also slow one's journey. The road may be impassable when wet, especially during and after a storm, even when a vehicle is engaged in four-wheel drive. Drivers are advised against taking cars down the Khunjerab Pass, and it is suggested that they remain in four-wheel drive along the way. In addition to being the world's highest international paved crossing, the Khunjerab Pass also boasts the world's highest elevation ATM, which is located on the Pakistani side of the pass, courtesy of the National Bank of Pakistan and OneLink. Number 3. The Derby Line. Much like the Barla-Hertog-Barla-Nassau border I told you about earlier, the Derby Line, which separates Vermont from Canada, runs straight through an ordinary town, and even through some people's homes. It also runs through the town's main street and library. For years, residents on both sides have thought nothing of the quirky boundary. Nobody knows for sure why the border is so disorganized. Some say that it's because the surveyors were drunk. Others contend that it was merely a mistake. Either way, residents along the Derby Line have lived harmoniously since the early 1700s. Scott Wheeler, a local hobbyist historian, explained in a 2016 interview with Janet Weinstein of ABC News that things are so peaceful the countries are separated by flower pots rather than a military-enforced border wall. Actually, the downtown area is home to a physical line of potted plants that represent the international boundary. Not surprisingly, love occasionally blossoms along the Derby Line between residents of different countries. When an American resident named Brian Marovich fell head over heels for a lounge singer named Tanya Mueller, having her over to his apartment was no big deal. It was located right along the Derby Line and even had both an American and a Canadian address. While security has increased along the Derby Line, no physical wall has been built between them. Number 2. Pheasant Island. Pheasant Island is a small island situated in the Bidasoa River between northern Spain and southern France. It's just a fraction of a square kilometer in size, yet since 1659, ownership of this tiny island has passed between Spain and France more than 700 times. There's nothing too exciting about Pheasant Island. Nobody lives there, and it isn't a tourist destination. In fact, neither country allows people to visit, despite the island once being a popular location for the handing off of brides and grooms during royal marriages between France and Spain. However, Pheasant Island marks an important historical site where the French and the Spanish negotiated an end to their lengthy war. One part of the agreement was that sovereignty of the island, which was considered neutral territory, was to be furthermore shared between the two countries. Since then, the island has been under Spanish rule between February 1st and July 1st, and under French rule during the rest of the year. What do you think about this solution? You rule this part of the year, and I'll rule the other part. Great! To this day, Pheasant Island isn't used for much and has been eroded to nearly half of its original size due to snow rushing down into the river from the Pyrenees. Yet the tradition of shared sovereignty between France and Spain remains strong, and the island continues to be routinely handed over every 6 months. Number 1. Korea's demilitarized zone. The border between North and South Korea is known as the DMZ, or the Demilitarized Zone. This 2.5-mile wide, 160-mile long zone marks the ceasefire line that halted the brutal Korean War in 1953 via the Korean War Armistice Agreement. It is heavily fortified on both sides, both of which are ever prepared to go into battle if necessary. The Demilitarized Zone is known as the most tense place on the planet. Some 60 years after the ceasefire that put a halt to the Korean War, North and South Korea are still technically at war. Armed guards stand just feet from the border, and in the years since the ceasefire, violence has occasionally erupted along the DMZ. Depending on which side of the DMZ you find yourself on, there are starkly contrasting narratives of the war. According to the Korea Tourism Organization, the DMZ is a hotspot for tourism, attracting some 1.2 million visitors annually. The most visited part of the DMZ is the Joint Security Area, also known as the Panmunjom Truce Area, which is identifiable by the Military Armistice Commission Conference Room, a bright blue building that straddles the military demarcation line. This area is surprisingly quiet and has been described by past visitors as haunting and unsettling. Bill Clinton, who visited in 1993, referred to it as the scariest place on Earth. Thanks for watching! What did you think of these borders? Let me know in the comments below. Remember to subscribe, and I'll see you soon. Bye!